Okay, now we're going to go with something called histograms. We're changing our focus from creating displays for categorical or qualitative data, and we're now going to focus on quantitative data. So a histogram is a way to display quantitative data. Okay, you got to keep that in mind. Sometimes people try to make a histogram out of qualitative or categorical data, and that's impossible. You just can't do it. If you have numbers and it's quantitative data, you need to make something called a histogram. There are other displays, but right now we're going to focus on histogram. And basically, a histogram is a bar graph for quantitative data. I'll put this up here. It's a type of bar graph for quantitative data. But we call it a histogram. It's kind of a fancy name for something that's really not that difficult to put together. Well, down here you can see I've kind of created what looks like the beginnings of a bar graph. But down at the bottom, what I've done is created something called classes. Each one of these is called a class. Sometimes they're referred to as a bin, or somebody may call it a bucket, or a pile. But we're going to call them classes. And every once in a while you'll hear me call them a bin, but a bin is the same as a class. So each one of these is a class. The first class starts at 30, the second class starts at 35, then 40, the next class starts at 45, then 50, the next class starts at 55, and you just continue until you get the number of classes that you want. I made the decision early that I wanted my classes to start at intervals of 5. Each one of your classes needs to have the same, start at the same interval. Right here we would say that the class width is 5. So the class width in this case equals 5. Because what you do is you take the lower class limit for each one, and you subtract it from the next one. So 35 minus 30 is 5. 40 minus 35 is 5. 45 minus 40 is 5. 50 minus 45 is 5. That's the class width. And every one of your classes needs to have the same width. You don't want to start at 30 and go 30 and then 35 and then jump all the way to 42 and then go from 42 to 51 and then from 51 to 54. All of your class widths need to be the same. Okay, so let's start to put these bars for the histogram into the display here. Well, up here I've got the maximum number of home runs from 1980 to 2009. Well, I'm just going to go through my list, and I'm going to figure out how many of these numbers fit into the class from 30 up to but not including 35. 35 is the beginning of the next class, so I do not include 35. So let's go through here and see if I can get all of them. So there's 31, so there's 1 in that class. And as I look, there are no others in that class. I'm going to use my tool up here to create a nice bar. And there it is. Now the one thing I haven't put on here yet are my tick marks on the left-hand side for frequency. So here we go. This will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'll stop at 9. I think that's far enough. I'll put some numbers here. 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's good enough. Okay? So there's 1 for that class. Now let's go from 35 up to 39. Remember, 40 is the beginning of the next class. Here we go. There's 1 in that class. I'm looking, and it doesn't appear to be anything else in the 30s. So that particular class also has 1. So there's my bar. 1 in this class, 1 in this class. Now let's go from 40 up to 44. Now there's a lot more in this one, I just know. So let's go from 40 to 44. Nope. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it looks like 8. Now it's time to create that, so I'm going to go over here and start right there, and this bar goes all the way up to 8. You guys will be drawing this by hand sometime, so using a ruler is nice, using a straight edge of some kind, but notice that the bars touch. I'll talk about that in a second, but the bars touch. Let's continue with the histogram. Now I'm going to go for the next class, 45 up to 49. Do not include 50. 50 is the beginning of the next class. Here we go, 40 up to 49. So there's 1, 2, basically all the rest of my 40s. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So once again, I have 8. Let's go ahead and create this one. This one goes all the way up to 8 as well. And there we go. The next one is from 50 to 54. Let's count all of those. So the top row is gone there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think I missed any. Nope, 6. I'm going to make this bar for my histogram, which starts right about there. Now I go from 55 up to 59. There's 1, 2, 3, and that's it. Create that bar. There we go. And now I go from 60 up to 64. And there are none. There aren't any in that particular class. So I skip over it and go to 65. So 65, it appears that there's only one that's going to be in that class. So let's put that in there. 65, right about there. Needs to be the same height as these two over here. And finally, the last class has 2 in it. 70 and 73 are going to fit into that class. That was Mark McGuire 1 year and Barry Bonds another year. But this goes up to 2, which is right about here. Let me move that down a little bit so it starts at the bottom. There we go. And there is your histogram. Now we're going to use this particular histogram for some other things later on, but that's how you make a histogram. You've got classes, and notice that the bars touch unless there's a gap. And the reason that the bars touch is because we are dealing with quantitative data, so there's no natural gaps in there. We go from 35 up, or 30 up to 35, 35 up to 40, 40 up to 45, 45 up to 50. Okay, now it just so happens that we're dealing with discrete, oops, put a little R in there, discrete quantitative data as well, not continuous. We'll talk about continuous at another time, but for this example, this is also discrete data because it can be counted. That's a little side note. But there you go. That's how you can make a histogram.